Political strife has always led to enhanced racism. Just traditionally speaking, even today, by the way, whenever it's the divide and conquer rule, when an authority is failing, he pits his people against each other, right? Through empty slogans and through racism. You know, look at us as an ummah today, mashallah, we're boasting about these flags that were given to us by the British. We were colonized, and we're holding up these flags, hanging them up in our shops, right? Putting them on our cars and so on and so forth. And these are the flags that were given to us by those who colonized us. And we're willing to kill each other over these flags. So political strife has always led to enhanced racism. And it's important for the Arabs in particular to understand the pre-Islamic hatred and disdain that Arabs had for black people, which was a very recent conflict that took place before the Prophet ﷺ. All right, so what was the tension all about? It really starts off with the Abyssinians. Ahlu Habasha, the Abyssinians, modern day Ethiopia. The Abyssinians, they trace their lineage, and this is actually very interesting because we said that Suleiman alayhi salam is described as having dark skin. The Abyssinians trace their lineage to Suleiman al-Bilqis, the Queen of Sheba. So they trace their lineage all the way back to Suleiman alayhi salam. In the 6th century, so we're talking about right before the Prophet ﷺ, the Abyssinians were allied themselves with the Romans, with the Byzantines, who were Christians. All right? And the Persians, you know, were fighting against the Christians, the Persians who were Zoroastrian. All right? So there was this huge war that was taking place in the world between the Romans and the Persians. Allah references it in Surah Rum. And basically at that time, subhanAllah, if you look at a world map at that time, in that entire region, we're not just talking about the Arab world, but you're really talking about the world at that time, was one big battle between the Romans and the Persians, and everyone, you know, allied themselves with one of those two groups. So the Muslims, as we saw later on, they allied themselves with the Christians because they were muwahideen. In some they were people who worshipped one God in some way. All right. Whereas Quraysh, they allied themselves with the Persians. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought about the defeat of the Persians in the same year that he brought about the defeat of the Quraysh in Badr. So the Romans defeated the Persians at the same time that the Muslims defeated Quraysh, the polytheists. So there was this, you know, this alliance between, it was a moral alliance, right? An attachment that the Muslims had to the Romans as well, to the Christians. Now, at that time, before Islam, before that all starts, Abyssinia, the Abyssinians were allied with the Romans. The Arabs as a whole were allied with the Persians. They were polytheists and they were allied with the Persians. Now, why is this significant? Because geographically speaking, Abyssinia was alone in supporting the Romans in its region. They used to call Abyssinia an island of Christianity in the sea of polytheism. An island of Christianity in the sea of polytheism. Abyssinia maintained its Christianity as well as its attachment to the Romans. So Abyssinia was always problematic, historically speaking. All right. Now, the Abyssinia king at the time was named Abraha. Now it's going to start to make a little bit of sense if you've taken Sunday school classes and sort of steel and stuff like that. Abraha al-Ashram. Abraha was an Abyssinian king, and he led an army against the ruler of Yemen at the time. The ruler of Yemen was Dhu Nuwas, and he was a Jew. So the ruler of Yemen, and we're talking about the early 6th century, was a Jew, and he used to persecute the Christians. So in the year 547, Abraha, the Abyssinian king, he leads this huge army into Yemen, and he conquers Yemen in the year 547. And he claims himself actually to be the ruler of Hijaz, the entire Arabian Peninsula. So not just Yemen, but the entire Arabian Peninsula. He persecutes the Jews because of the fact that the Yemeni king was Jewish, and he persecuted the Christians. And he builds this huge church in Yemen. All right. Now, when he builds this huge church in Yemen, he expects people to come and to all become Christian, all of the Arabs to become Christian. What ends up happening? The church does not gain the prominence that he wanted it to gain. He says, why? He says, well, there's the Kaaba in Mecca. People tell him there's the Kaaba in Mecca where the Arabs devote themselves to. So that's actually why Abraha decided to lead that march to Mecca to demolish the Kaaba. All right. So obviously that was in the year what? I'm going to ask you guys here. What year was that? 570, the year the Prophet ﷺ was born. Amul Fil, the year of the elephant, okay? When Abraha led this army of elephants to Mecca to demolish the Kaaba, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed him and his army, as is referenced in Surah Al-Fil. Now, we don't really know what happens in history after that, right? Sunday school doesn't go beyond 570 and Amul Fil. Then it just transitions into the Prophet ﷺ. But what do you think happened now between the Arabs and the Abyssinians? He was an Abyssinian king who declared himself the ruler of the Arabs, tried to destroy the most, whether you were whatever you were at that time, you held the Kaaba in high esteem. He tried to destroy their most sacred monument, okay? And so obviously the tension between the Arabs and the Abyssinians was high. After Amul Fil, what ends up happening is that the Abyssinians that stayed behind in the Arab world were captured and taken into slavery. Okay, so the Abyssinians were taken into slavery. Amongst them was the mother of Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu. You see, so slavery existed amongst them in many different ways. There's debt slavery, there's selling your children into slavery, there is concubinery, there's sex slavery. All of these types of slavery exist in the world at that time. And the world economy runs on slavery at that time as well, not just in the Arab world. But one of the forms of slavery was obviously through battle and so on and so forth. So these Abyssinians were considered as being at war with the Arabs, who continued to remain in alliance with the Persians. So they just captured all of these Abyssinians and took them in as slaves. All right. So Abraha is killed. The Abyssinians are taken as slaves. And in the Arab world at the time, as we know, it was all about your lineage. It was all about your tribe. So if you had no tribe, you were already humiliated. Okay. Being darker meant further discrimination. So being a slave was a humiliating state in and of itself, but being an Abyssinian slave in particular meant only further cruelty. Why? Because it was still a fresh conflict in the Arab world. In the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam fought this discrimination, which again was at the heart tribalistic. Even before Islam, it was still tribalistic. It was not, the Abyssinians were not enslaved because they were black. They were enslaved because of battle and tribalism and so on and so forth, okay? The Prophet ﷺ was fighting this even before he's a Nabi of Allah, even before he's a prophet. And that's why he was the youngest member of Hilf al-Fudul, the youngest person to take the pact, amongst the Arabs, that they would not allow anyone to be discriminated against on the basis of their tribe or where they came from, their tribe or their lineage. So Rasulullah ﷺ was fighting this very early on, before he's a prophet of Allah. And he was you can imagine a man in his 20s standing amongst people that are in their 70s and their 80s, the seniors of the tribes, and Rasulullah ﷺ was a member of that pact, which shows you that the Prophet ﷺ was an activist for social justice before he was a prophet of God. SubhanAllah, he was already an activist for these things. Okay? So that's pre-Islamic.